Hello everyone, thank you for coming. We're very pleased to have you all here. Just a note that this is being recorded, although I think none of your faces will be recorded unless you get really excited and you come over here. But if you don't want to be recorded, please let us know. I'm Andreas Philippopoulos. I'm a professor here at the law school at the University of Westminster and also lead the Westminster Law Theory Lab, of which Sylvie's Law and Religion how do we call it? Stream or something like that. Cluster, that's it. Some sort of metaphor is part of. And I can't say how pleased, delighted actually, I am that Sylvie's cluster is part of this lab. The lab prides itself on being quite radical, crazy, and doing very, very interesting stuff. And quite perhaps pushing some edges a little bit too far. And I don't think that this is the case here. I think that this case here demands a kind of a much deeper appreciation of what is happening in these areas of, on one hand, law, on the other hand, religion, and on the third hand, symbols and essentially semantics. So there has been a very successful conference throughout the day, precisely on the intersection of these topics, and the conference accompanies this was my suggestion, I'm afraid. Sylvie is all very humble about it. She didn't even want to make a fuss. But I said, no, it's good, come on, fuss. So we're fussing. And so we decided to have like a proper book launch. And I think quite right, because the book is quite wonderful. I know the price isn't so wonderful, but it's over there in case you'd like to play with it. However, the book really promises quite a lot, and actually delivers. And I think we have three extraordinary speakers, extraordinary researchers today with us. In a kind of very kind of proper legal way, we have split the book in three sections, actually it is already split, but then each speaker will have to speak only about their section. Now, in my rather dictatorial chair way, I will stop them after 5 minutes. The idea is that we want to have a flow of discussion rather than just papers, and we want it to be fun as well as enlightening. So we will start in this way, and very handily, our speakers are sitting pretty much in the order of appearance. But I will skip that order just for just 1 second. I know that probably all of you know who Sylvie is, but may I have the pleasure of introducing Sylvie Bacquet, who is a senior lecturer here, of course, and she teaches public law, human rights, law, and religion. And she's, of course, leader of this new Master's MA in Religion, Law, and Society, which is quite successful. It's quite an exciting course. And we're hoping that the whole course will recruit as much as it deserves, because the kind of stuff that they're doing is really, you see, quite cutting edge. And of course, her interest lies in religious symbols and the manifestation of belief more generally. And this book is a 2019 book by Routledge. And we have, as I said, the three speakers, Professor Russell Sandberg, Dr. Annecy van Engeland, and Dr. Umid Setin, who will talk about the three parts of the book. So I wonder whether I can introduce you now, so I can then let you flow. So Professor Sandberg, Russell Sandberg, is Professor of Law at Cardiff University. He's an expert in the area of law and religion. He's published some canonical, I should say, is that the appropriate word? Of law and religion with Cambridge University Press in 2011, Religion, Law and Society in 2014, and latest edited book, the research handbook on interdisciplinary approaches to law and religion, is due to be published next month. We also have Dr. Annecy van Engeland, who's going to talk about the second part of the book. No, actually, no, I'm getting confused now. So you just talk about whatever part you want. You'll take the second. Yes, perfect. Yes, you see. But Russell's going to be first. So Annecy is senior lecturer in international security and law at Cranfield University. Very interestingly, she was a human rights worker and an aid worker before becoming an academic. and her research addresses interactions between international law and Islamic law, with focus on security and defense. She's the author of Civilian or Competent, a challenge for the 21st century by Oxford University Press, and co-author with Rachel Ruddle of the 2013 From Terrorism to Politics. And finally, Dr. Umid Setin from Westminster, senior lecturer in sociology, teaching obviously sociological theories, global religion, transnational migration, identity, and work experience. And he's been working with the London Levy community around identity issues, along with Celia Jenkins since 2010. And he's co-edited the 2018 book, A Levism as an Ethno-Religious Identity, as well as in 2017 when he won the British Journal of Sociology Early Career Prize for his article Cosmopolitanism and the Relevance of Zombie Concepts. So, see, I told you it's going to be exciting. So perhaps we can start with Umid, who can talk to us a little bit about the first part of the book.
Thank you very much. You know, when you take a book like this and you to review and to read, to comment on it, the first thing that you actually have in mind to find the loophole and to just go and say, listen, this is what you have done, but it's also, you know, this is that. But I was responsible for the first part of the book, and I couldn't help. I went further and I read the other chapters as well, because it is a brilliant book. It's very diligently organized. All the arguments, cases are put in a very clear order, and I couldn't find any really loophole to.
This is not on purpose, by the way.
Yeah.
It's a celebration.
But this is
a
put the things in right order first. So I was reading this chapter on symbol, the functions of symbol in multicultural societies for identity and for religious groups. And Sylvia did an amazing job by putting these things, the argument in context, in a very diligent way, to say how, to argue that how law is taking a position that is essentially discriminating against certain group, because the group's definition and the law's definition don't always go hand in hand, or there is a discrepancy. So I just really, as a sociologist, and I was thinking about how this is possible, but Celia provides an amazing explanation for this. There are some cases. She takes UK as an example and juxtapose it with French model, two models, UK's pluralism versus French laicist model, whereas and Celia takes a clear position here. Celia says that UK model is much better compared to France, because it is providing a context where different and sometimes contradicting beliefs and symbols can be allowed to coexist in public sphere. But this doesn't mean that there are no problems. There are sometimes contradictions, and there are some good examples there. And for example, she takes this human rights, individual rights versus community interests. And issues around headscarf that we have talked about today, related to the book, again, we constantly refer to the book, and circumcisions, and other issues. But what I saw here is that, I myself do research with a community here, living here in the UK. And this community is fighting for recognition. And the symbols, the religion, the meaning that they give to their faith, their religion, is context dependent. Whereas Sylvia's position is a bit like there are symbols, religious symbols, that have meaning for people in every context in the same way. But what my case suggests, I use this as a theoretical framework to make sense of my case. I think that religious symbols, meanings, are context dependent. For example, the religious ethno-religious community I'm doing my research with, which is an Alevi community in Turkey, for example, in that context, it is not recognized as a religion or as a faith, but as a part of Islam, that an interpretation of Islam that's gone too far, too wrong. And therefore, the Turkish system is putting an assimilation case to just assimilate them, to correct them back into Sunni Islam. Whereas in the UK, this group are recognized as a religion, as a distinct religion. But this is again causing problem for the Alevi people, because some Alevi people saw their faith, their religion as an undefined, but an experience, as a lived experience. And this is the concept that Professor used earlier on. This is like this disorganized religions. Because the Western concept of religion, where Sylvia is criticizing rightly, is taking a Eurocentric position, saying that the religion must be like this. There is a criteria. If the religion that you have fits into this criteria, you're recognized as a criteria. But if not, it's not. Somehow, Alevi people had to put their belief that it was a historically disorganized belief system, a religion, into this framework in order to be recognized. Because in this context, in the UK, we talk about religious identities. Again, I think that identity is a contextual, they are situational, because you don't talk about identities when there is no talk of identities. In the UK, in a multicultural, multi-religious context, people talk about identities. Therefore, ethno-religious groups like Alevi people who also need to have their religious identity, therefore they had to define themselves, to give a definition to the state or to the Charity Commission to be recognized as a religion in order to say that I am different but equal to you. The difference and equal is a crucial point here that again is a part of this book. Because when Alevi children go to school with the children of different religious groups who talk about their religious identity, who celebrate their religious identity, they were told that why don't you have a religion? Because you're coming from Turkey, also the assumption is that you're Muslim, but you lost your way, you lost your faith, you therefore need to be corrected. So there was a constant pressure on Alevi people, Alevi children, to go back to mosques, to go to Quran courses that weekend, to be Islamicized. And Alevi people don't feel that they belong to that faith. So therefore, they found the definition that they were recognized as a religion. So my argument, again, just one of the things that I agree with Sylvia, is that in context like Britain, where multiculturalism, where pluralism is providing a context for different identities, on the one hand, it's brilliant, yes, we celebrate diversity, we celebrate, there is respect as a value, but on the other hand, this causes problem for the people who are following that particular faith as well. Because there is no way that we can have a unique kind of one way of understanding of what is religion. And this is something that we need to bear in mind. Sylvia rightly criticizes the way that the British court and Western states courts are taking a position in defining what is religion, what is not. And what symbols should be allowed, what symbols shouldn't be allowed. She does this very well, very clearly. But I think my position, if you allow, I would like to give a critique. My preference wouldn't be the UK model, but the French model, because the assumption of the UK model is this, that we have achieved a society on the grassroots, on everyday way. We have achieved a society where we have mutual respect, we have mutual acceptance, therefore we can freely express our faith through symbols. And I think this is not the case yet, because there is still prejudice on the everyday life, even in the classroom that I teach at university, and I don't think that I'm always comfortable with expressing or telling students what actually my position is, because it involves lots of issues there. So I think, in the French model, we should push religion to the private sphere, and let the public sphere be more kind of ruled by the secular values of what somehow we need to find a solution for that as well, because I'm not too clear about the solution. But the model, I think the French model, and something that I don't agree with Sylvie, is that my preference would be the French laicite model rather than British multicultural model. Although, as a member of the Alevi community, we were given an opportunity to be recognized, and now that Alevism is taught in schools and the Alevi children are proud, it empowered Alevi children in a sense that they, in the past, said, we are sort of Muslim, because they couldn't define what Alevism is. Now they're saying, we are proudly Alevi. So there is a campaign in the community centers. But I still think, if there was not a context where there were lots of different religions and people were talking about religions, Alevi people were quite fine with not asking their religion to be taught at school as well. So it's the context we need to question, rather than a kind of the religion as per se, as religious symbols as well. So overall, just to conclude my point in the first round, it's a brilliant book. there's no group of to just go and criticize it. And the only thing I don't agree with Sylvie is that I think that French model is still the best model to use to manage religious symbols.
I think at this point, perhaps we would all go for the French model, especially when Brexit is coming. There's no Frexit in the EU. But I wonder whether, because you talked about concepts of how symbols according to Sylvie, which is really interesting because I didn't read it like that. You said that symbols work regardless of context. And so my reading was quite different, and I'm quite intrigued by your reading. And I wonder whether we can go now to Ansi, who's talking more about the law in relation to symbols, etc. And of course, the law we know, it's something that is jurisdictional. It's all about context. It doesn't operate. The French and English don't share that law. So I wonder whether there's already a different context in place happening and altering these symbols.
So I'm going to use the microphone because my voice is starting to go away. I apologize. So first, I just would like to start by making a general introduction to your book, Sylvie, and by saying that I totally enjoy reading it, not just because it's in my field of work, but also because it's an easy book to read. And Sylvie approaches quite complex concepts, but she has a way of expressing herself. And when you read the book, even though you're not familiar necessarily with what is a religious symbol, you close the book and you're like, oh, I understood everything, and I will actually remember everything. And I think that's very well done. And then, Andres, you're absolutely right to bring in that comparison between the French and the British model. So my part was about France, United Kingdom, and US, comparison from a legal perspective, and a lot of what you said is going to come true, where you've got a British system that is embracing cultural diversity, as Sylvie is explaining, while the French system is sidelining that diversity. And I actually raised the question with Sylvia at one stage of criminalization, which is that in the United Kingdom, a cultural symbol is not criminalized, while in France, wearing the veil is being criminalized. And Sylvia actually goes into that analysis of the law in 2004 and 2010, and explaining how using those laws actually causes a process of exclusion. I think that's one of the impacts of French law. What is also interesting is, and that comes true very much also in the book, is the way the United Kingdom approaches the role of the law in the nation compared to how the French approach the law, the practice of the law, in terms of nation state. So what you have is courts on both sides that are not keen to engage with religion. And if you go to a part in the book, page 101, actually Sylvie mentions the Bacquet's paragraph 2, and she speaks also about the Watkinson case in paragraph 1, where she clearly shows that the judges are not happy to have to decide about religion. But the French do it because there is an agenda in France about pushing the minorities to the side because of La République, while the British are not happy to engage with it either in court, but they have this argument of cultural diversity. And I think you demonstrate that very well in the book. Shall I continue? Yeah? There is one thing that I really liked in your book, is the Christmas tree conundrum. In France, we are having debates every winter about the Christmas tree. And I think the book, my understanding of the book is that it props up a good context to understand that debate about the Christmas tree. And Sylvie looks at all three countries without mentioning the Christmas tree. I think you mentioned it once. And I just jumped at it because we talk about it all the time with friends. And I was wondering, okay, here is a symbol of what used to be a religious symbol. Is it still religious, or is it now secular, that Christmas tree? And why is it a problem to have it today? And Sylvia engages in a very interesting conversation that I hope she can come back to now, which is, how do we assess a religious symbol? So what's the difference between the virginity ring the bracelet for, was it the Hindu? The yeah, or the veil. So is it a matter of size? Is it how present they are? So she brings a solution that's a legal solution that you find in the United Kingdom, which is the idea of being intimately linked to your religious belief, and the French don't engage with that at all. So I thought that was another part of the book where you can read the Christmas tree issue, and you have like different approaches from the British and the French. So hopefully you can talk about these triggers as well. And then you use a French scholar who was actually my PhD supervisor, Oliver Roy, I think it's in English. And Oliver Roy has an argument that is the standardization of religion. So it's when you essentialize religion to make it fit into the mainstream culture. And it's not by accident that it's a French scholar speaking about this. That's what the French do. And I think you demonstrate very well that dynamic where the British, especially in courts, are trying to avoid doing that, while the French actually engage with this. So yeah, that's very much like the dynamic that you were talking about, Ruth, but playing out in court.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is really fascinating. It's also when we talk about, I guess when we talk especially about religious symbols in France and in the UK, we necessarily enter that area of the different legal systems. So we know, apart from the fact that they're different because they're different countries, we also know that one is Roman law and the other one is whatever it is. It's like common law. I'm so stressed with Brexit, right? I'm repeating everything. Okay, and I think there's a very interesting difference. One is this idea of how common law focuses much more easily, with perhaps more grace, on issues of particularity, of the individual body, of the individual. And at least on some theoretical level, it listens a bit more to the particular conditions of whatever the case is. I'm not saying that Roman law doesn't do that. In fact, it does to a large extent. But it also has this facade of absolute objectivity. Quite often, it wants to appear that it's beyond bodies. And somehow it's really, I mean, this is though a really interesting thing, because we see that there's a convergence in some areas of these two things. And I think possibly in religion, I mean, I was privy to the notes of the speakers earlier, and I think that, without wanting to preempt what Russell's going to say, it starts with this quote from Sylvie, which says, all these problems are of the future, and they inevitably going to go away. So, I mean, now we're looking into the future, and perhaps Russell can guide us there.
Thank you very much indeed. It's very much a pleasure to be here. And in many ways, I had the easy job, because I was looking at the third section, which is the shortest one. I say the easiest job because it was no job at all. As we've already heard, it's an impeccably well-written book. And you know when you read something that reads as being effortless, you know, my word, the amount of effort that's gone into it. So, you know, this book is a symbol itself how to do good legal scholarship. But I'm going to zoom out, because the last two chapters, chapters 8 and 9, is where Sylvie zooms out. Okay, so he zooms out to look more broadly at the questions of how the law, whether the law should accommodate both religious symbols and other practices. And as he points out, these issues are unlikely to go away. So he points out very early on in the chapter that looking to the future is always a very risky thing for a legal academic to do, to get out a crystal ball. But he does at this point, says, looking at the future, judges are likely to have to continue to deal with this stuff. I paraphrase that slightly. Chances are judges wouldn't use the word stuff then. You know, it's a polite evening do in London. Stuff, not all. And what I've noticed about these final two chapters is that there's two distinct contributions which Sylvie makes. And she kind of does it without fanfare. And so you only kind of notice that it's done once it's been done. And it's done with a sort of quiet efficiency, which is the hallmark really of a really sort of confident, mature bit of scholarship. Says someone who often just sort of touts ideas around and says, look at this idea is what I'm on about. So sort of seeing the restraint was great. And chapter 8 is a theoretical chapter, and I liked that, because quite often in a book, particularly sort of academic books, you get your theoretical chapter at the beginning, where you're trying to skip past it to get to the interesting stuff. And what Sylvia says is kept back the theory towards the end. So you can now, after looking at what the law does, what the law could do, and the forensic analysis of the case, you see, gets to the theory. And so he highlights different theories about religious freedom. Why protect religion? So as he looks at these particular theories, the religious argument, but basically religion is itself something that's superior and ought to be protected because of religious worldview. The historical argument, which as he brilliantly points out, is the reverse position, because it's saying religion is so weak and so vulnerable historically that it needs to be protected. And then he talks about the autonomy argument, that the liberty to choose one's religion is part and parcel of one's right to individual autonomy. And then he talks about the human rights argument, it's like an overlap, where he says the struggle for religious liberty is the thing that gave the impetus to the human rights movement. Now, the points he's making, and this looks at counter-arguments to this, is that the debate as to what the purpose of protecting religion and whether religion ought to be protected is a debate which goes on and is a debate which we can have. I don't want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is her first contribution in these chapters is, and it's a quiet insistence that by identifying these different arguments, he's also saying, hang on a second, the law embodies certain views. Now that's much easier to spot in your continental system, in a system like France, where it's codified, it's there, and it's in your face, and you've got people saying quite sort of firmly, this is the purpose of the law. The common law system, it's much more difficult to find. But nevertheless, what Sylvie's doing by pointing out these different rationales, particularly the autonomy rationale, is he's pointing out that although we sort of think about the law as this sort of objective thing floating above our heads, and this thing which is fixed, it's absolutely not. And what Sylvie showed, in a very unshowing way, is that the law is constructed and that the law is embedded with all sorts of values. And at one point, she has this fantastic phrase where he talks about the liberal law of religion. Now, lots of writers about law and religion have written about liberalism and the effect of liberalism on the law. And quite often, most of it bores me to tears. But what Sylvie's doing is he's doing something better than that, because what she's doing is she's showing that those values are informing the arguments and are therefore part and parcel. And she's highlighting things which are there, but you otherwise would only see in the corner of your mind. It's clever, subtle stuff. And it raises the question of, is there another way of looking? What would happen if we didn't have a liberal law on religion? And then the second contribution comes in the conclusion itself. And it's brilliant because it gets back down to the practical level. How should judges deal with disputes? And so it revisits the familiar debate about the extent to which the state should intervene in such matters. But although it's a familiar debate, the way in which he pitches it is very, very interesting. I'll read a sentence, because I think the end of this sentence has a killer point, which most people ignore. So he says, too much state intervention may hinder the ability of individuals to enjoy their freedom of religion, and in some cases give too much importance to religion itself over non-religious beliefs. So what he's saying here is that the more we protect religious freedom as a thing, the more we have a risk of not protecting beliefs that are non-religious. Where do you draw the line between religion and other forms of belief? And of all the questions which cases on non-religion have agonized over and generally messed up royally over the last 5 or 10 years, it's that question. I mean, the other week, as I was saying earlier at the workshop, the other week there was an employment tribunal decision which, when you look at it, my word, it's just completely garbled. The employment judge is trying to determine whether vegetarianism should be protected. And he comes to the conclusion, no, it shouldn't. But in so doing, he says, oh, we will protect vegetarianism, but veganism probably would be protected. Because there's a line between vegetarians and vegans. Because vegans have a firm view of things. Vegetarians, they're just making it up. And you go, what? And what I think is very important is that Sylvie raises this, and again, it's raised in various different contexts. There's a long-running campaign for humanist marriages to be given the same legal recognition as other types of religious marriages. But what's interesting is, having identified that problem, the solution which Sylvie then comes to is what she calls a holistic approach. So rather than trying to ask, how connected is this manifestation with a religious belief? Instead, she takes a subjective approach and says, how essential is it to a person's identity? And if you then follow that approach onward, I'm hoping that future work with Sylvie will follow this onward, you then really start to develop what would be the tests for this. How would you identify this? And this would be nothing less than a complete change in the legal framework. From protecting the content of beliefs, from saying that religious beliefs are what we're protecting because we're protecting religion, and we're protecting non-religious beliefs to the extent they are similar to religion, and that's our rationale. To a system, instead, which is about personal identity, which is about personal ethics, which, like I said, that would be a significant leap. So what I read in the conclusion to this book is actually a very radical assertion which poses a number of really deep questions and should be the foundation for scholarship, not only by Sylvie but by others, which will completely rethink everything we've come up with so far, when we're talking about not just religious symbols, important as that is, but the whole interaction between law and religion.
Thank you. And the idea, of course, that comes really quite forcefully out of all 3 presentations is that we're moving almost beyond symbols, and this is really quite fun. May I share with you just one sentence from the book, which I particularly liked, is from the conclusion. It says, in the courtroom, the focus should shift away from religion itself and religious symbols, stroke manifestations of belief, towards individuals and the impact that doing away with a particular symbol would have on their overall well-being. Now, somehow, I don't know how she manages to do that, because I remind you, the title of the book is Religious Symbols. So she writes a sentence which actually says this book is useless, because we want to move away from what I've put on the title. No longer religious symbols. But there's a real wisdom in there, and I think that you all picked up on that this idea that we're talking about, there's something behind it. And really interestingly as well, I think this is like a veritable quagmire, because you're trying to balance so many things, like religion, faith, and belief. And there's no lapse between these 3 things. And that's, I don't know how you managed to do it, because I have no idea what these 3 things are. And yet, there's a kind of a clarity, as you say, of all that, and how, I think the most important thing is how we return to kind of a new focus, not just of the law, but also of ourselves in relation to symbols. So go beyond the symbols and think about the connection, precisely as the discussion that goes on in law. It's not about the law, it's not about the principles, it is about the connection that the law has to the particular individual and to the particular case. So the law isn't abstract, it isn't all that stuff. And I think that to a large extent, that's also why you go a little bit contra the French system because of all that. But I wonder, would you agree if we were to give Sylvie some time to respond to some of the questions? Not exhaustively and not in a defensive way. We have established that there are no loopholes. So even Umit said that, who set out to discover all of them. So just a brief response to maybe a comment or two or three that caught your attention.
Do it in a methodic way?
No, just go. Just say whatever.
You're going to throw me here. Well, I guess if I start with what struck me the most in the comments. Okay. Yeah. What I think struck me the most in the comments, I think Russell definitely, sells my book in such an amazing way, and I pretty much agree with most of what you're saying. In relation to what Umit says, and his preference of the French model over the English model, obviously I will want to react to that, and that's probably for me the one thing that I picked up on the most out of the three talks. I would say I was on the one side, and I was growing up in France, going to the secular school, the School of the Republic. I was reading laicity for 18 years, and I have sort of had a first-hand experience of laicity. And I grew up, and I'm kind of getting a little personal here, because the book is also, my entire research area is the result of a personal trajectory. But I sort of grew up as a lost identity a little bit. I grew up without an identity, and I say that at the beginning of the book, because I was sort of made to think that religion was something that was maybe dangerous, or was maybe taboo, or was something that you have to keep at home and that you don't really talk about. So it made me it had the opposite effect on me, in the sense that it made me want to know more about religions. I used to hang around wearing 3 different religious symbols at once on a chain. And then I came here and saw this complete reversal, and it opened my eyes that there was a different system, and it was possible. And I think once you start studying both models, and I spent probably the last 10 years looking at them in a lot of detail, and I think the French model, as a theory, makes a lot of sense, but the British model in practice works much better, because even though I don't necessarily agree with the established church as a principle, in practice it means that the British system places itself pro-religion, while the French system immediately places itself anti-religion. And that has a huge impact on minority faith. But of course, for the majority, for the Christian majority, it's absolutely fine, because the Christian religion does not have this strong requirement, this strong, public element that people display their faith in the public sphere. So this, to kind of in short, answer Umit's question as to why, I would, even though I'm not pro-establishment in the sense of as a concept, I would say that out of the 3 systems, there is also the American system that I look at in the book, but out of all 3 systems, it's perhaps a paradox that the one that has got an established church is the one that is better able to protect diversity and to accommodate various identity and groups and cultures. So this was the first thing that really, caught my attention.
I think that's definitely food for thought. I wonder whether, this was a nice moment of en temps cordial. We can actually go and fight about this. But I wonder whether there's something about the way that, and obviously because of the way that this panel is set up, and because we're talking about this particular book, but of course talking about religion is such an incredible generalization, and the book isn't generalizing. It's very nuanced about what kind of religion we're talking about. But at the same time, I just wonder how we can actually really easily talk about. The kind of politics and religion that take place in say, France and the UK, the kind of the way that in both cases there's a little bit of a cover-up going on. In France, there's a cover-up of we don't want to know, and of the difference of that stuff. I think in Britain, there's a cover-up of we don't want to know the conflict. We don't want to. So there's kind of you start with this idea of in France there is no difference, whereas in Britain there is no conflict. And that's a really interesting. I mean, essentially it's an ontological position. Do you go for for accepting the conflict and facing it, or do you go for just simply ignoring it? And of course, this is not always.
Who are you saying says there's no conflict? You say Britain as if it was everyone had the same view. I do think there needs to be clarity. You've written about England, you're talking about Britain, and I hear a lot of people talking about how there is conflict. So I'm fascinated by the discussion, but I would be grateful if you could just spell out who these people are who say there's no conflict.
I think I was actually referring to Church of England, so you're probably right that I should be referring to England rather than Britain. But I think there's this fundamental difference between, on one hand, Church of England and the way that it deals with it's not that it denies the conflict, but it deals with the conflict differently than perhaps the Catholic Church as a whole. The Catholic Church as a whole sees the world as a Catholic world. Church of England sees the world as a world of differences, and it somehow accepts conflict. I mean, it's a classic moment when you go to sort of Church of England Church as a Catholic, you can still be part of the Holy Communion and enjoy the supper. If you go to a Catholic Church as a Protestant, you can't because you're the devil. So there's this kind of really interesting moment of kind of how we deal with difference as conflict or difference as we ignore it. So I mean I don't know. This is just a bit of perhaps just a thing, but I just wanted to bring out that possibly things that seem a little bit religious or perhaps increasingly religious are actually political.
But I also wanted to come back on some of the other points. Do you
Sure.
want me to?
Yeah, please do.
May I come back on because Anissa in her talk asked the question of how do we assess a religious symbol? So, and I just wanted to say a little bit more, I guess, for people sitting here. And one thing I do in the book is to criticize the various legal approaches, and I look at the case law. And one thing that I know Anissa picked up on was what is the difference between a purity ring and a carob angle, for instance. So I just wanted to come back a little bit on that, and then from that I can then pick up on Russell's point, who also asked another question, which was, if we adopted this approach, then how the outcome of the case is a bit different, right? So I was going to try and answer these two questions. So so certainly one of the legal tests in England has been whether the symbol, the manifestation, is intimately linked to the belief, which is one of the approaches I criticize. So just to give you some background for those of you who don't know the cases, so the Playford case, which was a case that kind of really sparked my interest around then, right, sparked my interest and really kind of, triggered this gut reaction. So you've got this girl who goes to a secondary school, she's about, I think, 15, 16, and she decides one day that she wants to wear what we call a chastity ring, a purity ring. She's attended a movement called the SRT movement Silver Ring thing, where you go and you're trained for a couple of days, and then at the end you make vows that you're going to remain a virgin until marriage. And so they give you a ring, you buy the ring, and you wear it. And you're going to wear it until that is replaced by your wedding ring. So the school that she was attending had a no jewelry policy. So when she returns to school wearing that ring, she's told, well, no, you can't. You can't come to school wearing this. But she tries to argue that it's a manifestation of her faith as a Christian and of her belief in chastity before marriage. And the courts, to cut a long story short, come to the conclusion that that ring, that chastity ring that has a verse of the Bible in it, is not worthy of legal protection. Why? Because there is nothing in the Bible that makes that ring a requirement of the Christian faith. And I, at the time, had this gut reaction of, but why? You know, why not? And then we had this other case which followed, which was the Watkins case, which Alison mentioned. There you had a girl wearing a carabangle, which is a bracelet, a silk bracelet. And same thing happened, same sort of situation. And eventually, through a roundabout way, then her lawyers managed to argue that it was race discrimination because Sikhism also happens to be an ethnic group. But that's a long story, going too far. But then I ask, you know, if Watkinson can wear her bracelet, then why can't Playfoot wear her ring? You know, what is the difference between those two things? You know, they're both tiny. Is it a health and safety issue? Well, none of them pose a health and safety risk. Is it the visibility? None of them are highly visible. Because then we add to this the Begum case where, you know, the issue was a jilbab, a long coat, and then maybe you have the visibility issue. But between those two, you know, pieces of jewelry, there's no difference. So the approach that I'm suggesting and what I'm trying to do in the book is to try and establish a link in part one between religious symbols, manifestation of belief, and identity. And once we've established that link, then we can foresee that courts benefit from this approach, this contextual approach, which we would borrow from sociology, which Rubik mentioned. But I'm not sure, because you seem to disagree with me, but actually I agree with you. I agree with you that what lawyers need is the context. And to get that context, we need to look to sociology. So I completely agree with that. And so the approach as Russell was brilliantly putting, what I suggest is to look at it from the point of view of identity, rather than to look at it from the point of view of religion, because what the law does is it puts things into boxes: secular, cultural, religious. And so if we can make the crucifix become cultural, then we can tolerate it in an Italian classroom, in an Italian secular classroom. But if something is, you know, if something is religious, then that can't stand in a secular state. So rather than trying to put things into categories, which is what the law is doing, and which is where Olivier Roy comes into play, I propose that we start from identity, we start from the person. And so if we were to revisit the Playfoot case, to answer your question, using that method, and we were to put some context, then I think Lydia surely would have been allowed to keep her ring, because the ring was tiny and didn't, you know, why do schools have to wear policy? Usually it's a health and safety thing, right? And that ring didn't present a risk to health and safety. So I was trying to answer.
Thank you. May I ask a question, Sylvie? I think that what you're doing in the book is really admirable, especially considering something that perhaps some people here don't know, that law school at the University of Westminster has about 60% Muslims, or perhaps even more, perhaps sometimes it's 60 to 70 during varies. And I know that lots of Muslim guys and girls come to your class because they're really interested in it. At the same time, I know that they really feel quite provoked by it, and they just go. And it's a really interesting balance. I mean, I don't know how you manage to do it, because you know, you have all that laissez-faire thing, and you're really pushing for it. But at the same time, you're actually understand laissez-faire in a really different way, in a really contextual, sort of anglicized way. So, how do you think that this book bridges a little bit the difficulties of teaching this cohort and yourself particularly in relation to the cohort?
Yes, certainly. I mean, the book is, you know, it is great to have it all there and being able to use it as a tool, but my approach has always been one of, you know, provoking them. And I don't know if any students are left now. I think through the day, you know, they've been gradually phasing out. But most of them, so when we discuss Playfoot in the classroom, most of them say, well, no, she shouldn't be allowed to wear her ring, because if it's not, you know, a requirement of the Christian faith, then no, she shouldn't wear the ring. That's fine, we completely agree. But it's about, I guess, you know, provoking them and making them think differently. And yeah, it is a struggle sometimes, but I always warn them that I do this for their benefit. and it's fun. You
It
know,
hurts, but it's
fun.
good for you.
It's fun.
But I'm sure it's good for you as well, because somehow I wonder whether the clarity that all three speakers praise in the book comes also through this sharpening of your ideas through your teaching. It's quite a lot of it, you know, and I think our students are also quite provocative as well. They can really go for it when they believe in specific things. And this kind of forces us a little bit into assuming positions. And although we kind of, I mean, I'm sure you do the same thing, you don't want to say what you think, but it's about, you know, what emerges from the discussion. I wonder whether this helps a little bit in the kind of clarity.
Yeah, so I've been, in the last few weeks especially, I've been testing the ideas of the book with students, actually, with the new master students and even some of the third-year students. And especially, Russell was mentioning that when I go through the various theories, and I present this argument, which is quite new to them, is that, you know, some political theories have argued that, you know, why should we even have freedom of religion? Well, we might not need it because we've already got all the other freedom, and that could come under, religion could be protected under the other freedom. What is it that makes religion special? And so when I introduce this concept to them, you know, obviously they feel, you know, quite attacked. And when I tell them, you know that veganism, I have a vegan friend, you know, she'll be very happy that her veganism is protected. But yeah, when I tell them, but you know that veganism is protected at the same level as religion. Wow, that's deep reaction from them. Yeah, completely. Yeah.
And what about if people would be amenable to opening up to questions perhaps, or comments or something like that, and then perhaps the whole panel can respond or say something? Is there, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but if there is a question waiting to come out of your mouth, then please do, or any comment?
Just take it round.
Thank you. My name is Harriet Crabtree, and I'm the director of the Interfaith Network for the UK, which links national faith communities and interfaith bodies. And back in 2007 it was, we put out an executive committee note that was on the wearing of dress and symbols, and it reflects on the principles that underlie why they're worn, what consideration should be taken into account, a range of things. And it's been interesting listening to the conversation. It's a very important book, I think, and an incredibly important topic. The danger is that one can evacuate the significance of the religious symbol by virtue of creating a new form of laicite, by relegating all religious symbols, or not relegating, morphing them into cultural symbols. That's the first thing, because it might make it perfectly easy for the Italians to have a crucifix in a classroom if it was redefined as cultural. But if in a British context one was to purely define a crucifix as cultural rather than as sometimes worn for cultural reasons, but actually as a religious symbol, I think it would cause great concern. And the second thing, and may I finish the point? I think somebody's probably waving behind. But the second aspect of this is that I think the argument about the chastity ring, or whatever it's, purity ring, that is a very different sort of a symbol from a crucifix. Now, one can make the kind of the argument that of subjectivism. I think this is where I become slightly puzzled by this, because I think if you go to a point of extreme subjective definition of the individual's definition of what matters to them, there's a logic to it. I understand your logic, but again, you move towards an evacuation of the kind of almost sort of numinous significance of what one might call the or bottom level symbols in some of the traditions. I think within the traditions, people do make a distinction. They may disagree about which the most profound symbol is, but they do make a distinction between those symbols that are the most fundamental ones that have gone across centuries, and those where there are differences of opinion over whether you should wear the niqab or the hijab or particular things in different faith communities. So I think my question, it isn't a question, it's a reflection that I think is incredibly interesting book by the sound of it, and I've skimmed conclusions as you were all talking, but I do have a slight concern that if one put it in the British context, I think Britain is, and the reason I commented on Britain and England, because obviously the Church of England is quite different, and I would say the difference, the handling of difference and interest and tolerance for difference is not just the Church of England, it's actually there within all of the different nations in different ways, and comes also out of the developing legal history, which is not completely identical to religious structures. So in sum, I think this is an incredibly interesting argument that one focuses more on the individual, but by doing that, one evacuates a large amount of the power of the religious. So
I think that's quite the question, and I'm sure that everyone's jumping, waiting to talk. It's a really interesting topic. Do we have another comment or question, or shall we deal with this? Karen.
So congratulations to Sylvie on producing such a great book and such a great book to read. But my question was that one of the things that I found most interesting about it, particularly the first few chapters, was that engagement with anthropology. And I wanted to ask Sylvie about to say a bit more about why she focused on anthropology rather than more on the political philosophy. Which, I mean, I think that, there's lots of writing that engages more with political philosophy, but less, I think, with the anthropology. And I think it's one of the things that makes the book quite unique. And I was wondering how that fed into her conclusions.
I wonder whether, actually, the panelists have some reactions, both to the questions that we heard, as well as to some of the points that Sylvie. So perhaps we can take it one by one, and then we can end up with Sylvie's.
Actually, I'd like to bounce back on yours, because when I was reading it, I kept coming back to governance, nation state. Is that what you're really thinking? Because I was thinking rule of law. Thank you.
So I was thinking in terms of politics, political philosophy, social contract, governance, rule of law as well. I was wondering if the social contract as designed in France and the social contract as envisaged in the United Kingdom does not give birth to different political philosophy that would also fit into the court's narrative. So that I'm glad you're bringing up the political philosophy aspect.
Can I also comment on it? And my reading of that chapter again was that Sylvie says, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a gap between the law and the actual meaning of symbols from the grassroots. So in order to close that gap, I think she's suggesting that we need to focus more on the social anthropological perspective for symbols, what it means for people, what meanings are attached to it, and again, in what context. That's why that's my reading is that that's what you.
Because this all started from, I guess, I questioned what could be the functionality, given that some states are trying to suppress them. I questioned what could be the functionality of symbolic manifestation in 21st century pluralist, modern, mostly secular states. And so I felt that what I needed to do was to try and maybe clarify and go back to the roots of things as to why people have always had this need for symbols. And so this is what I tried to do in the first part of the book, and this is why I use sociology and I use anthropology and history as well, because it's obviously better placed to try and provide this in-depth analysis. And I even use archaeology a little bit in respect of trying to explain what the first symbols were, which goes towards what you were saying actually, which what I was trying to do was trying to demonstrate how important manifestation of belief can be for communities, for people in general, and to try and establish the link between manifestation and identity. And that's why I sort of deemed that other disciplines were much more suited to doing that, because law tends to sometimes not look at the context as much as anthropology, whereas anthropology helps with having this more holistic approach. And a quick example I would give is the example of the kirpan. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that, but it's the little sword that Sikh men, when they are baptized, that they wear. and it's essentially a knife. So if the courts, were to look at it in the way that they look at it, they're going to have to decide: do we let a boy going to school wearing what is essentially a knife? But if you start digging into the context and trying to understand the rationale behind, wearing this knife, and even look at the statistics, then maybe you can start making compromises. And the American court, actually, the US Supreme Court, has made some compromises in respect of the care plan. So all this multidisciplinary approach at the beginning of the book was trying to open up and create this better understanding of religious manifestation, and then slowly bring it back to the 21st century. Why is it that people still need their symbols? And I sort of link it to identity, which I argue, in the context of globalization, is something that is getting increasingly diluted, and so people are in need of this, in search of their identity. And so in that sense, I come across as pro-religion, but I also wanted to explore the other side of the coin, which is why I go into the other kind of argument which you mentioned, and which perhaps those who are more religious will not like this argument. But I was trying to really look at both sides, I suppose, in a traditional academic way.
So may I just say also that it seems that this book traces a very specific line, and I was very convinced, intrigued and convinced by the use of anthropology especially, and how this has led to precisely the focus on the individual and community belief. So in a way, I think this comment is a really valuable one, because what you risk is the vacuity of religion itself, not just of the symbol. But this might not be such a great risk, because especially if, as Russell mentioned, and put emphasis to your idea of liberal rule religion, I wonder where this will take us, and how, liberal also risks, any manifestation risks vacuity, and risks being co-opted in all sorts of different ways. So it's a really fascinating struggle, and I wonder whether, this might be the next book, the liberal law of religion or something like that. No, forget it. But there's also this marvelous, I'll have to say again, this marvelous emphasis on the object. So it's not just symbols, it's not just semantics, but you're dealing with real material stuff, and the way that these material objects link to the body. So we're talking about a material and embodied understanding of the symbol, which also is linked to a material and embodied law. Perhaps it's a wishful moment, but certainly something that you really convincingly suggest.
Can I just add one thing? I don't want to reveal the whole book, actually, but
Anyway,
there is, I think it's in chapter 4. Chapter 4, I used some empirical research that I had done here at the university with people who carried, a symbol, and so through these in-depth interview, I was able to really understand the attachment. And often, when people talk about their symbol, whatever it is, it could be this pen, it often unravels, all sorts of emotions, family, history, and it really gets quite deep and quite personal and quite intimate. And so, which kind of reinforced this idea of the importance of manifestation of belief.
Also, the point on the meaning of symbol from a social anthropological perspective. I think we also need to consider the meaning of. Now, so far we have looked at the issue or the problem from the insider's point of view. All right. So in other words, we are looking at the meaning of issue, for example, from a Christian group's perspective, or Jewish Christian's perspective, or Alevi or Muslim perspective. But the other side is also important. Yeah? I don't think we should also, again, sociologically and anthropologically, look at the meaning of some symbols for other groups as well. For example, what it means for the people that this is, for example, I just want to find a good example. Current examples in Turkey, for example, like this symbol means now occupation of Kurdish areas is justified. The football team did this 2 days ago, and likewise the racist, racist symbols. So if we just focus on the groups like per se, we also are ignoring the other groups. So some symbols probably are meaningful for the group themselves, but also the other groups. So, like for example, swastika or the fascist symbols for Jewish communities, for anti-racist communities. So I think there is a quite kind of balance there that we need to, we need to be careful, when we say the law needs to, give an understanding to the symbols there, but also the law needs to make sure that what it means for other people on a broader level.
And I think, and that's what the law is about, and that's why the book is called The Intervention of the Law, because I acknowledge that the law absolutely needs to make an intervention, but we have to be careful that this intervention of the law doesn't become an interference with manifestation. So I very much support that intervention when obviously a manifestation of belief will, clash with someone else's human rights. Yeah.
Wonderful, and I think that's also goes back to what you said about the state intervention and how there can be too much state, too much intervention, too much law. So again, another fine balance between, as it were, the individual belief, the protection of religions as a system by the state and by the law, and too much law on the other hand. So I think this is a wonderful moment to perhaps conclude. Just want to thank you all for being here. Thank our panelists for really thoroughly reading the book and wonderfully commenting on it. And I can guarantee that their notes were much more longer, and there was so much more that they could have talked about, but I'm a bit dictatorial here and I decided not to. I'm sorry. I will sleep well tonight regardless, because I think that what's important is we managed to celebrate Sylvie's achievement, which we all agree is quite an extraordinary thing. So we wish this book great good luck, and we look forward to the next one. There might be more wine.
Can I just thank Andreas for conducting this wonderful panel, and thank the panelists for having done such a thorough review of the book. They actually speak about the book 100 times better than I can. So I'm incredibly grateful for all these comments, which will no doubt feed into further research and further publication. Maybe not a book yet. I need to recover, and my parents need to recover, and my kids need to recover. But I just want to thank all my friends and colleagues and everyone else who also came to the conference today for coming. It's just so wonderful to be able to celebrate with you. There are some drinks left, and we went and got a few labels, so there will be some labels available in a minute.
Good? Do I switch it off?
Thank you very much. That was amazing. I wanted to provoke them.
No, you did well. You did well. No, it was good. It was good. It was fun, and it was lovely to. Yeah, absolutely.
But I feel genuinely that the French model is in many ways is superior than.
It's a